Hey, Chris.
Hey, Jason.
Feels like we just did this.
Yeah. But second time in person, so, it's the background noise is rough, but we'll be fine.
We'll survive. Today, once again, an hour later, we are joined by our next guest. Nate, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, my name is Nate Berkopec. I am a performance consultant for Ruby on Rails applications.
Awesome. Thanks for taking an hour out of RailsConf to join us.
Of course.
So, kind of one of the low-hanging fruit questions we always ask everyone, how they got their start in programming and subsequently Ruby.
Yeah, so I actually got my start in programming because I was graduating from college in 2011, and I wanted to work in tech startups. So I went to college in New York City, and I wanted to work at a tech startup. It was super hot back then, 2011. Like, you got to remember, Foursquare was like taking off, and Twitter was taking off, and so it was a really hot industry. And so I knew I wanted to work at a tech startup, and I asked a faculty advisor. I said, "Well, what's the easiest way to work at a tech startup?" And he said, "You got to become technical. You got to be a programmer." The business jobs at a tech startup are a lot harder to come by. So I was like, all right, sounds good. And taught myself how to program in like the last 6 months. Never had a computer science course at college. And then got a job as soon as I graduated at a tech startup in New York, and sort of took it from there.
So you actually started with Ruby?
Oh, yeah, because it was super hot back then, right? Like in 2011, I was like, that was what you're going to learn.
GitHub.
Yeah. So it was like that or Node, and I tried Node and couldn't wrap my brain around it. And I started writing Ruby and was like, wow, this makes so much more sense. And I also, at that time, found Y's Poignant Guide. Okay. And I was basically like, okay, if there's a community that can produce this, then that's the community I want to be a part of.
Yeah.
Even though Y's Poignant Guide was like way before that, right? I think
and he had left, I think, by then.
Yeah, he was long gone. But like, it was just the fact that this was the thing that the community produced, like, that I wanted to be a part of that.
Yeah, I felt the same way. It was
and also, like, I got to shout out to Michael Hartle for Rails tutorial, because I think that was also probably something that pushed me down that road. Was like, I had read a blog post of someone else who said, listen, I locked myself in a room for a week and I did this Rails tutorial thing, and then I came out on the other side a Rails programmer. And so that was my plan too. Like, I was an intern at the time at this tech company. I guess I'll call it a startup. And I basically just went off the radar for a week, didn't tell anyone what I was doing, and taught myself how to program with Rails tutorial over the course of a week. And then once I came out the other side and like started writing programs, like to do some stuff at work, and people were like, when did you learn how to do this? Like,
That's
did
funny.
you know how to do this before?
What were you going to do before programming?
I don't know. Like, I just went to, I went to the business school at NYU, Stern, and I knew I wanted to be in entrepreneurship. I knew I wanted to work for myself, and I thought, oh, that's what you go to business school for. And it turns out you go to business school to get a job at a consulting company or a bank. So, like, it took me about a year to figure that one out, and I was like, oh, all right.
That's funny.
Yeah. So it's a natural progression. So I have to ask, so you want to be an entrepreneur, you go on Shark Tank.
Yeah.
I have to know.
Yeah.
I have to know.
Yeah, that was 2008, I think. No, 2009.
A couple of years before your programming's on your radar.
Yeah, yes, very much. So it was like I had like a t-shirt company that I had started with like a sort of like socially responsible bent to it, and I was like reading this entrepreneurship blog, and they had this ad or like thing, a post that was like, major network seeks entrepreneurs for new reality television show program, because Shark Tank had not aired at this point, right? This is the first season, so no one even knew what it was.
You're like OG Shark
So the
Tank.
the ad didn't say what it was. It was, what series it was. So I, sent in an email and was like, oh, I'll never hear back from that again. I heard back, and then they sent me this massive application packet, and it's like 25 pages, and like you got to send in a video, and I remember dropping all that stuff into a FedEx Kinko's box at like 11 o'clock the day it was due, and just thinking, well, I'll never hear back from that again. Then I got a call from a producer, and yeah, eventually I ended up on the show.
Is it actually in New York where they filmed it?
No, it's in Los Angeles on like the Sony backlot.
Oh, wow.
So I think I had to walk through the set for How I Met Your Mother to get to this Shark Tank set.
That's neat.
Yeah.
So they fly you out there. What's that experience like?
I mean, it was weird. It's kind of like, it's that, I think at the time, it probably still is. It's a Mark Burnett production. So that's the guy that did Survivor. So they know what they're doing.
Sure.
And like, it's a very well-oiled machine. And this was the first season too. So like, you'd expect some kind of like hiccups and stuff, but no, like every, they had clearly planned out, what I was going to be doing, like where I was going to be. I never saw the sharks until it started taping. Like, so I had no interaction with them. I'd never seen them until I went onto the set to tape my segment, right? And they have you, so there's a hallway that people walk down. At least there was in the first season. I haven't watched, in the last 10 years, so I don't know what it looks like now. But you had to walk down this hallway, and then you would start your pitch. And that's how it looks on TV. But in real life, it's a forced perspective hallway. So it's like actually really short, and you have to walk like kind of slow. And it's like got those like forced perspective, like fake, like huge walls and stuff. And
That's wild.
That's hilarious.
And they have like it's a guy with a steady cam like 3 feet from your face, and like another guy who's like frantically grabbing the cables and like rolling them up behind him, and you have to act like they're not there. And then you walk up to your mark where you're supposed to stand to do your thing, and then you have to stand there for 2 minutes while they get B-roll. So they're like, there's like jibs like flying around, like getting face shots and there's stuff to like fill in for later, and you haven't said a word to the sharks at this point, right? So you're just staring at them, like waiting for them to tell you to go for like 2 minutes while these cameras are whirring around.
That's funny.
So yeah, it's like surreal. It was definitely weird. I mean, but at the same time, it was like that's like they do all that to keep it as genuine as possible. Like my first time I'd ever said a word to them was like right when the camera started taping, and like from what I remember, they cut almost nothing from my segment. Like I think pretty much everything I said ended up airing. So like they know how to produce reality TV for sure. It was being part of a very well-oiled machine.
Was it nerve-wracking?
Oh yeah, of course.
Who are the people you had to pitch to?
The first season cast was what was his name? Kevin something or other.
I don't know.
I think they got rid of him later. And then Barbara Corcoran, Kevin, the Canadian guy with the bald guy, and then Robert Herjavec and Damon John. And
no Cubes.
No, Cuban was the second season, I think, or at least maybe the third. I don't know, but yeah, I didn't have him.
You're our first TV celebrity. So
yeah, this is a special moment. So that's what led you to success.
Yeah.
So you're off Shark Tank. You go to school. You earn programming now. So what were some of like your earlier programming jobs?
So my first job was basically, our first couple of jobs were at various startups or people in New York that I knew. I think so. I think, especially when I was in college, like I thought networking was like going to meetups and handing out your business card. But what I realized very quickly was that networking is just being nice to people, and they will feel like they want to pay you back for that. Like part of the reason why I'm here today is because Jason's a super nice guy, and like I want to pay him back for all the you being a good guy.
I appreciate that.
And so my first job, like I pair programmed with this guy at a co-working space for like 2 or 3 hours. His name's Trace, super nice guy. And I programmed with him for like 2 or 3 hours, and like he then thought I was a nice guy and sent my name on to someone when someone asked him like, hey, I need a junior programmer. You got anybody? He's like, yeah, I just talked to this guy. You should talk to him. That was my first job, right? Like I was nice to someone. They were nice to me. And so, I worked at tech startups that way. And then worked would contract for a friend's startup. And then I got a job at a 500 startups company. It was called Craft Coffee. It was like a coffee box subscription.
Okay.
And I worked there for 2 years. It was a lot of programming, but like it's a 5-person startup basically. So you end up doing everything. Like I took over from the operations person when they quit. So like I was in charge of like shipping, 800 coffee boxes a month. Wow. Out of this like Brooklyn space. It was really fun. Like I ended up, reading a lot about lean production, like the Toyota production system, and like redoing our whole assembly line and trying to like reduce the amount of work it took to assemble a box and send it out the door. It was like super fun because it's kind of like programming. It's like it's system design.
Sure.
So that was fun. And then after that, I've been freelance ever since that job. So that was like 4 or 5 years ago. And I started doing freelance and just loved it. So that's what I've been doing ever since.
Was it the freelance stuff that led you into the performance focus?
So, well, kind of. Actually, like at that last job, it's an e-commerce company, so I started getting interested in performance because I had read a lot about how the link between site speed and revenue in e-commerce companies. Like no one's gonna wake up 20 years from now and wish their website was slower, and like so putting money into or putting time into performance work was like it just seemed like this obviously good thing for me to be doing, especially on like the checkout and on all that, the revenue important parts of the site. So that was how I got into performance, really was doing that at this company. Then I started writing about it, and that took like a year or two after I quit, I think. I don't remember, but and then when I started writing about it, then like I was like doing some hot takes, especially about TurboLinks, about how I thought it was good. And DHH like retweeted one of my articles, and it like blew up, and I got all this readership, and I was like, I should keep writing about this performance stuff. And then it was like just the uptake from writing about performance stuff at that time, which is that was like the feedback, like, oh, this is a market need. Like people need some feedback and need some advice here. And that was how I got started on the performance road.
That's cool. So you still freelance, or I know you do workshops and stuff?
Yeah, no, I've been 100% freelance for last 4 or 5 years.
Cool.
Yeah.
So when you got started in performance, you mentioned one of the first articles was like about TurboLinks. Mm-hmm. Were you just focused on like performance as a whole, or did you kind of like dive into like maybe like server side, front ends?
I mean, I've always been like a full stack performance advocate.
Sure.
I say that there are 2 things you can do with performance work, and that is to improve the customer experience, to improve perceived performance of the website, like this website feels fast or it feels slow, or you can decrease server costs by decreasing latency. So if I can reduce your site's latency by 50%, then most of the time I can reduce your server costs by 50%. So it's the only really 2 things you can do with perf work. And that first one, which is what people think perf work is mostly about, improving the customer experience, actually it turns out most of the customer's experience of whether a website is fast or slow is governed by what happens on the front end. Your Rails applications response latency is 100 to 250 milliseconds, but the average experience of loading a web page is 5 to 7 seconds.
Right.
So you could have the response time of your Rails app and make a 2% dent in the perceived performance of your site. So, and this also I think it's partially due to the time that I got into programming was like when full stack was a bit more of a thing. So that's always been my perspective is like I have responsibility from the back all the way to when the customer starts using the website, right? So so I go all over. I obviously only talk about Ruby and Rails on the back end, but I talk about front end quite a lot as well because it matters quite a lot.
So if we can maybe get some hot takes for a second. So follow you on Twitter, talk a lot about, how Ruby is still relevant and Rails is fast enough, things like that. Mm-hmm. How is your perception of this, like, we're splitting out the back end, front end movement?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Like, I have a lot of client apps now that do that. I think, the what are the issues with JavaScript heavy front ends? One of the things that really bothers me is it seems like a lot of, especially the more mature ones, the ones that have been around for a long time, like the legacy JavaScript front end apps, the mobile performance is just garbage. Like, it's hot, flaming garbage. And like, so many of these places literally just say, yeah, you can't use our site on mobile. Like, just, go use an app. Like, that's sad to me. Like, I don't believe in the App Store ecosystem in the long term. I think that the web is beautiful and amazing, and I wish that more mobile websites were not trash fires, and I wish they were nice and good to use. But, so that kind of makes me sad that, like, the new front end paradigm is just to mobile web, too bad. Like, that kind of sucks in my opinion. But other than that, I mean, it's fine. I think the whole, like, Basecamp Golden Path package of, like, let's not do that much JavaScript, let's, Turbolinks the front end, and it just allows a development team to focus a lot more on just being competent in one Rails tech stack, right? And, like, mostly write Ruby and to write only a small amount of JavaScript. I think that's valuable, and I think that's, especially valuable at companies that are under, 20 engineers, which is what most of them are, right? So I just don't think we should be so eager to throw that stuff out the window.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. There's like a part of me as a programmer that, like, gets really excited about, like, the React and stuff like that, but it's not super applicable to what I do day to day. So it's like an internal struggle.
And I think you also just have to remember, like, because I've really loved DHH's, like, slide in his initial talk, his keynote. It was like, he had that SpongeBob meme and it's like, but does it scale? Like, I get that a lot, like, but does it scale? And the truth is, like, the Rails Golden Path absolutely scales. Like, you look at Shopify, GitHub, Basecamp, CookPad, all of these sites use a full stack Rails app which does turbolinks.
Right.
Like, 3 of the 4 I just named use turbolinks explicitly. GitHub uses PJAX, which is basically turbolinks.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, like, this approach scales in the most huge way possible, right? Like, if it works at GitHub, it will work for you. So that approach, it just doesn't have the marketing that React has, and it doesn't have it doesn't translate as well to Hacker News driven development, so it's too simple.
Yeah, that's like, people don't want to use it because they know it's simple, and they're like, it's like a lot of beginners look for something hard because they want to do hard stuff eventually, and then the further along you get, you want to do simpler stuff. It's pretty funny.
And the endorsement of these, like, top 10 in the world sites, I think, really does go a long way. Even though GitHub is top 50 or something now, like, just the Facebook and the Google and the Apple or whatever, whatever they say to do, people just seem to flock to that, which I understand to some extent, because I understand, especially when you're a beginner, it's a lot about job prospects, and you think that, okay, if it's approved by Facebook, I can learn it and get a job using it, right?
Right.
So I understand that.
So this might be a tough one to answer, but as someone who I assume has worked on many apps in terms of performance, like helping people improve their speed, are there any, like, certain things you can pinpoint that are, like, common mistakes people make in terms of performance?
Probably mistake numero uno is just overuse of active record. Like, the active record makes it super easy to fire off a query, and it just makes it too easy. I call this code that goes bump in the night. Like, I think most people just don't actually understand what their app is doing. When a request goes off, like, they don't understand the code path, like, where it starts here, like, what's a rack middleware, and then, like, what's happening in these rack middleware, and then, it goes into the app, what happens in the routing layer, what happens here, and, like, no one people don't normally have to go through that execution path. Like, they don't have to understand the steps involved. And so it ends up being like what happens a lot when I bring people in and show them how to profile and benchmark. Like, we open up a profile for the first time, and it's like, what is all this code? Like, what is all this doing?
Right.
That's that. And Richard's talk, which I can also recommend, from yesterday here at RailsConf, Richard Schneeman, he had like a little metric that he brought up for removing code for performance reasons, which was like, is it necessary? Is it clean? Is it performant? And is it useful? I don't remember the fourth one.
Sure.
But anyway, like, you can't remove or optimize something that you don't understand. And I think that's I guess the mistake then is like not actually understanding what goes on from a code path perspective when a request comes in a Rails app. Profiling is the easiest way to get to figure that out, to like get deeper down that path. Because a profile will literally show you like, okay, you spent this amount of time on this line, this amount of time on this line, and so on and so forth. But like when I show people that for the first time, I think it's kind of overwhelming because they've never had to think about their Rails app at that level before. But you have to think that way because you have to understand it and know it before we can start optimizing it, right?
Do you think that's a thing that maybe, how do I word this? Maybe we don't teach basics enough in that?
I don't know. I mean, like, I think that's just the natural progression, right? Like, the first thing you gotta, what is it the saying? Like, first make it work, then make it clean, then make it fast.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, like, that's the progression. That's fine. I think that's natural way, because also, like, getting it work is the thing that pays the bills, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah, I guess what good is speed if you have nobody using it?
yeah. So, and premature optimization and all that. So, I'm fine with that progression, right? I think, I'm actually kind of against, like, trying to teach a basics first approach to programming. Like, especially for me, what got me motivated was seeing something come to life for the first time.
Something you can use.
And that's what the Rails tutorial does. Like, it doesn't, it teaches you how to use Git, but it's not going to teach you what a tree or a blob is, right?
Right.
Like, all it taught you was enough to get you to making your own Twitter. And like, that was like, oh wow, I made my own Twitter. Like, that was the aha moment for me. And so I don't think we should be teaching people basics first, because I think it just can get you bogged down in the way of getting to that point of the aha.
Yeah, no, that's actually like what got me in programming. So like, I was doing front end work, HTML, CSS, jQuery, not JavaScript. Didn't know how to use JavaScript, and like, I was tired of not being able to like work with data. Right, I was like, I build these like front ends, and then I'm the only one that can do anything with them. And so I was like, oh, I'm gonna learn some PHP, and like, I sat down to do it, and like, I didn't even know what a framework was, and I was just going through Jeffrey Way's like PHP tutorial, and I was like, this is so much work. And so like, I was googling, and that's what led me to Rails. And like, like, there were PHP frameworks, I just didn't know about them. But like, I spent 2 weeks trying to learn like how to like make database calls in PHP, and I was like, well, this doesn't feel like it belongs here, but I don't know. Like, and then you pick up Rails, and like within 2 weeks, I had built like a full application with like database association, stuff like this. And I'm like, I'm a freaking like superhero right now. There's definitely something to be said for that. So, you launched a product, how many years ago now?
I think 3.
3?
Yeah.
The Complete Guide to Rails Performance. It is an ebook, video series, interviews.
Yep.
Is that all correct?
Yep.
Slack channel, anything I'm missing there?
I think that's it.
Okay. I remember one of the first videos that I saw, you were interviewing, actually, you were talking with DHH.
Yep.
I remember there's something that like sticks with me, and all my friends in the Ruby community still talk about it, is when DHH said, well, if you're doing Russian doll caching, N+1 is actually a feature. Yeah. And I remember how mind-boggling that was. Yeah. Like, all these years later, I don't know. It was like, those interviews led me to be like, I need to buy this course.
Yeah. I remember that super clearly.
The intentional N+1 was probably something that deserved more of a follow-up than I ever actually gave it. But
You might want to explain it to anybody that doesn't
okay,
know.
so let's say you have a app with an inbox full of messages, right? And so you have like 10 of them in a list. And the traditional approach to do that would be like, at messages equals message user.messages dot first 10. Okay. In a world where you are Russian doll caching that list, that means that every row in that inbox, every message is fragment cached. So if every row is fragment cached, then if you are loading all the messages in the controller or in the view, then you're doing extra work because you didn't have to load them because they're already cached and rendered and ready to go. So the way that Basecamp does it is to write the code in such a way that the rows themselves have the job of looking up one message. And so that means that when you are fully cached out, there's no SQL. You just do the lookup for the fragment cache. But it also means that when a new inbox or new message comes in, you will look up the one message, the one new one, and then render it and then cache it. So if the cache is completely cold, then you have an N+1 and you look up a message for every row.
Right. It seems like that initial load is a small price to pay in the grand scheme of things for a fully hot cache.
Yeah.
So, how's it been like releasing a product that's like you've built a community around it?
You didn't take it to Shark Tank.
No.
What's that experience been like?
Oh, it's been great. I mean, it's cool. Like, I mean, it was always my approach in the beginning, but it's, I guess, just been ever more validated day to day. Is like, you have to think of myself as building an audience and not building products. I have an email list. I have, now a customer list of people that have bought the course, but like, I think of myself as working for Rails developers, and it happens to be that, I work for them for performance-related stuff. But I start with the audience and then, build the product to suit that audience.
And I guess, you're right about performance. You kind of built an audience that way, like helping, like having DHH tweet your articles probably helps a little bit too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it helped in the first one, but, he didn't retweet the other
sure.
2 or 3 dozen that I had to write, to prepare for the course to come out. So that was more just like a hint of like, oh, you're on the right track here.
Yeah.
Like
A little bit of
there's some
validation.
pickup here.
Yeah.
There's something here.
And then recently you have shifted into doing more workshops.
Yeah. So this summer I'm doing 15 of them actually.
So awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're actually doing one tomorrow, right?
I am doing one tomorrow. Yes.
Did that one sell out or?
No. I don't price them so that they're gonna sell out. Like I try to keep them as small as possible.
Makes sense, yeah.
And because part of what I like to do is bring people in and have them bring their actual Rails app that they work on every day, and I actually will look over their shoulder and help them to figure out, when we put these performance tools onto their actual apps, like to help them understand the output. Because one of the really difficult things, which I was sort of talking about earlier, is like this is probably the first time a lot of people coming in my workshop have ever followed the code path of a Rails app from, line 1 to line 1,000,000 at the end of the request. So helping them to understand, like, okay, so this part here is coming into the rack middleware, and then this is the Rails router. Here's the code that it calls, and then here's the action controller stack and all the methods that it calls. Okay, now here's your actual app, and helping them to understand the output on their real application and not some like fake one or simple one that then when they go home they open up their profile on their actual app for the first time, like they're like, what the heck is this?
Yeah.
So that's why I keep them small intentionally for that reason.
That sounds awesome. I am trying to work on coming to one in Chicago. I don't know if it's going to work.
Oh yeah.
I'm really interested in it. We, in my day job, like we've grown quite a bit, and like performance hasn't necessarily been like a real big issue, but it's become a bottleneck in certain areas. Like it's the first time I've actually personally had to implement caching in an application, things like that. And I think there's so much more I could learn. Like I bought the course, and like when I went through it, I don't know if I finished the ebook, but like when I started it, like I wasn't dealing with those problems.
Oh, okay.
And so like, because the majority of the apps I worked on were like internal software systems that like were used by like 100 people. So like, yeah, they were like, performance was a little bit of an issue, but we could also just throw more dynos at it.
Yeah,
like,
and especially on the measurement and diagnosis side, like it's one thing to throw some of these tools on like an internal app that maybe has a couple of contributors and maybe a year or two of history, and then another to throw it on the big bad monolith that has been around for 5 years and is serving lots of traffic and features and customers and stuff. There's a different level of complexity and skill required to do that.
It's nice though because you hinted at it earlier. Like one of the common complaints or criticisms of Ruby and subsequently Rails is like it doesn't scale, it's too slow. Of course, Ruby's dead, Rails is dead, and like not only is like your stuff valuable in that it teaches people to like make their applications faster, it's also like social proof alongside these other top 100 apps that like this is not a problem. Like you have to be a little bit knowledgeable about it.
Yeah.
Like,
It goes back a little bit to what Justin was just talking about in the last episode, where he was like, it's actually nice that a lot of the people who are just here because of the hype have left. And we just have to reinvent and say, like, it's actually really good to be stable. But it's also like, this is a piece of that where it's like, as a reminder, like, it's not actually slow, or it's plenty good enough.
Yeah, I think we just have to work at it a little bit.
Yeah, and it's like really good marketing in a sense for Rails and everything and Ruby, just being like, look, guys, like,
but here's a solution, here's the path, right?
Yeah. So I think it contributes a ton to that.
Yeah.
So it's been awesome.
were you at Ruby Kaigi last week?
I was.
How was that?
Oh my God, it was amazing. I love Kaigi. Yeah, everyone listening to this should go. It was incredible. It was huge this year. It was like something like a 50% increase, I was told, of the attendance over last year. So it was in Fukuoka, Japan, and Fukuoka is some kind of like tech. I don't know how I want to phrase this. Like the government is trying to push tech in Fukuoka. So like, I think if you like get an entrepreneur visa in Japan, like you have to go live in Fukuoka.
Oh wow!
Really?
Like that kind of thing. And like the governor of Fukuoka gave like an opening remark in English and was like very technical and like talked about why Ruby is so good for startups and stuff. It was like really, really impressive.
That's incredible.
They shut down a whole city street, actually 3 city streets for the after party.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So Ruby's like a first-class citizen there.
Yes, very much. So that was pretty crazy. And if you've never been to a Kaigi, it's kind of targeted at Ruby committers or people who would like to work on Ruby. So all the talks are Ruby. They're also all pretty technical and pretty low level. And so I like that. It's very challenging. I learn a lot. I felt like this year at Kaigi, like there was a lot of stuff being announced for the first time and a lot of, stuff being debuted. So like the Sorbet project got a great talk. Matt's talked a little bit about the static type system that's going to be coming to Ruby 3. And so it just felt super cutting edge. And I absolutely loved it. I love Japan. I love going to Kaigi.
So what are some of your kind of initial takes and thoughts on Ruby, 3 progress? And
So I think what's like Ruby 3x3 was the promise that Ruby 3 will be 3 times faster than Ruby 2. And that looks like it's almost definitely going to happen at this point. But that's only an artifact of the way that they measure Ruby 3x3. So they measure it based on this benchmark called OptCaret, which is a Nintendo emulator. It's extremely CPU heavy, so it's like if you've ever like looked at an emulator source code, like it's just like moving bits around. There's really no memory pressure at all. There's not a lot of objects being created. It's just like very CPU intensive. So that benchmark is almost definitely going to be 3 times faster. So Ruby 3x3 is officially going to happen, but Rails apps are not going to be 3 times faster on Ruby 3 than they were on Ruby 2. Noah Gibbs has been doing a lot more work on this than me, is to figure out exactly what the impact is. I think they're probably going to be about 2 times faster on Ruby 3.
I'll take it.
Which is right.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say no to that either. So that's exciting. The stuff that's happening on the JIT side is really impressive. So Takashi Kokubun gave a talk here, which is the same talk he gave at Kaigi, but in Kaigi gave it in Japanese, on his work on the 2.6 JIT. Now the 2.7 JIT, and that's a pretty exciting project. Like right now, we're really at the stage where he's just kind of laid the groundwork down, and now I think we're going to get into the stage of being able to get the payoff from some of that groundwork. Rails is kind of like one of the most difficult applications for a JIT because it's so huge, or so the method surface is enormous.
Right.
So that is kind of going to be a tough test. I'm not sure if we're going to see the benefits from the JIT before Ruby 3, and then static types, or type checking, I should say, it's going to be a thing. So that's official. It's committed. It's going to happen. I have no idea. It seemed like some of the stuff that was presented at Kaigi was sort of like very experimental. They just sort of decided on an approach. Basically, it involves these files called RBI, I believe, RBI files, that the intention is that the runtime will generate these files. And they're basically like, they analyze the runtime and they say, okay, this class and this method usually only gets fed an integer. So we're going to say it takes type integer, and then it generates this RBI file that says that information. So it's sort of like automatic type annotation. Then the intention is that you will go into these RBI files and add, modify, whatever you think it needs. But for the most part, they think that for applications, they should be auto-generated.
Oh, wow.
So that's the approach that they're taking. And it seems all very new, but it did have a working demo. So, that's there. So hopefully that'll be done for Ruby 3.
So if you write your own class, can you write your own RBI file?
Yes. Yes.
And then you can actually annotate your inputs and outputs.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
Have you looked into Truffle Ruby at all?
Yeah, so Chris Seaton, the Truffle Ruby project lead, is an active member of my Slack community, and it's an awesome project. I actually just popped it open the other day. I don't remember, I think it was like trying to get a benchmark or something, but I just noticed it runs Sidekick out of the box with no issues right now.
Wow. Nice.
So that's a big step. I think with the Rails support, it's always like a thing. I think they're at 99% done on that, but it's always the last 1% that stops you from running an app, right? I think they have the same kind of stumbling blocks that JRuby has in that front. Although they can actually run C extensions, which is the sort of secret sauce for Rails adoption there. But it's a super cool project. I think a lot of people are nervous about the fact that it's Oracle backed. They're someone could come into their office any day and be like, yes, this project's over now. You can go home. And that's Oracle has done that kind of thing in the past, right? That could happen. And so your own Oracle opinions may color what you think about Truffle Ruby. I think, there is, but I also think there is a very green grass at the end of this possibly, right? Yeah. Where there's a Truffle Ruby Enterprise Edition that's a paid interpreter that is 5 times faster than regular Ruby that you run in production, right?
Yeah.
And we can call it Tree. We've made it.
Yeah. And a long time ago, there was that Ruby Enterprise Edition,
from Hong Li, that was a very popular thing. So. Yeah. It could work. It could happen. So, from what I understand, there's always going to be a community edition, which is free. And they haven't announced or talked about any plans for anything else, but you can assume there will be.
Do you mostly see people using MRI or?
I've had a small handful of people using JRuby. I'm not the person to really ask about JRuby. I think I specialize more in CRuby. But like that JRuby client, I think was really using it because they had a JVM app before, and they kind of migrated from Java to Ruby, and they saw JRuby as like an easier way to aid that transition.
Yeah.
So,
Makes sense.
JRuby is not only about performance, right? Like it's also about that JVM interoperability and Java interoperability. So I think that's a pretty strong use case for a lot of people.
Yeah, I was just curious, like if anyone was using it just purely, for performance or whatever.
I don't know of anyone personally that's come to me for that reason.
Interesting. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah.
Any links or things you want to plug?
So the site for my consultancy is speedshop.co. And all of my performance stuff is on there. So workshops are happening this summer. First one is this weekend, but really they start in June. It's starting in New York City. I'm going to New York City, Atlanta, Chicago, Denver, pretty much everywhere. So if you live in a somewhat major hub city, I'm probably close to you. So go check that out.
Awesome.
Great.
Thanks so much. And yeah, talk soon.
Thanks, man.